Have you ever worked so hard for a family that you forgot they weren't really yours? This isn't about a billionaire's generosity. It's about a 6-year-old boy who saw what adults couldn't. I've researched hundreds of stories about family dynamics and class differences, and this one reveals something profound about what really creates a family. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most powerful words aren't spoken by the most powerful people. Maria Santos went from being just the help to becoming the heart of the Morrison family, proving that love recognizes no boundaries. If you've ever felt invisible, despite giving everything, this moment will restore your faith in human connection. The Morrison mansion stood like a monument to success in Silicon Valley's most exclusive neighborhood, 15,000 square feet of marble, mahogany, and crystal. Yet inside those gleaming walls, a family was slowly falling apart. Richard Morrison, 42, had built a tech empire worth over $200 million. His days began at 5 a.m. with global conference calls and ended near midnight with investor reports. Success had a price, and Richard was paying it with the most precious currency of all, time with his family. His wife Margaret spent her days orchestrating charity galas and country club luncheons, her calendar as meticulously planned as a military operation. Their son Tommy, just 6 years old, moved through the vast house like a ghost, speaking in whispers to the portraits on the walls. Into this emotional vacuum had walked Maria Santos 18 months ago. At 38, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite wearing the blue uniform that marked her as the help. She'd answered the ad for a housekeeper after the 5th nanny had quit, claiming Tommy was too difficult and wouldn't bond. What those professionals couldn't see, Maria understood within hours. Tommy wasn't difficult. He was starving. Not for food, but for the kind of love that notices when you're scared of the dark, remembers your favorite bedtime story, and celebrates when you finally tie your shoes by yourself. Maria filled that hunger naturally. She sang gospel lullabies her grandmother had taught her, her rich voice echoing through rooms that had only known the cold hum of expensive electronics. She taught Tommy to make cornbread in the restaurant-sized kitchen, his small hands covered in flour as he giggled at her stories. "Mama Maria," he'd whispered one evening, the name slipping out as naturally as breathing. Maria's heart had stopped. In that moment, she understood the dangerous territory she'd entered, loving a child who wasn't hers in a house where she was merely an employee. But love doesn't ask permission. It grows in the spaces between scheduled activities and official responsibilities. It lives in the cup of cocoa after nightmares, the band-aids applied to scraped knees, the patient explanations of why some people have more money but not more worth. For Maria, this love came at a cost she'd hidden from everyone. Every month, she sent most of her salary to Chicago, where her mother Evelyn battled diabetes in a cramped apartment. At 65, Evelyn Santos had raised 5 children alone after Maria's father died in Vietnam. Now she needed her daughter's help to afford insulin and rent. The crisis that would change everything began with a phone call on a Tuesday evening in March. Maria was in the library dusting Richard's collection of first edition business books when her phone buzzed. "Maria, baby, I'm in the hospital." Her mother's weak voice crackled through the speaker. The world tilted. Evelyn explained through tears that the diabetes had damaged her kidneys. She needed surgery, $12,000 that might as well have been $12 million for a family already drowning in medical debt. "I didn't want to worry you, honey, but the doctors say, they say if I don't get this surgery soon," the line filled with the sound of a mother trying not to terrify her daughter with the word dying. Maria's hands shook as she held the phone. Around her leather-bound books, worth more than her mother's life savings, mocked her desperation. She'd asked Margaret for an advance on her salary the week before, only to be dismissed with a wave of perfectly manicured fingers. "Maria, we have our own expenses. Perhaps you should learn to budget better." Now, sitting in a room worth more than most people's homes, Maria faced an impossible choice: stay and watch her mother die, or leave the little boy who called her mama and rush home to Chicago, probably never to return. The decision tore through her chest like a physical wound. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get attached. Professional distance, that's what all the agencies preached. But Tommy had crept into her heart, with his shy smiles and fierce hugs, his way of slipping his small hand into hers when storms rattled the mansion's windows. As she sat among the expensive books, holding Tommy's Spider-Man pajamas, fresh from the dryer, Maria Santos made the hardest decision of her life. She would tender her resignation in the morning book, the first flight to Chicago, and pray that her mother's love would be strong enough to bridge the distance until they could be together again. The tears came then, silent and devastating, falling onto the soft fabric of a little boy's pajamas, as a woman's heart broke into pieces she wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. What Maria didn't know was that her quiet sorrow had been witnessed. Richard Morrison, for once in his adult life, had come home early from the office. A server crash had shut down their European operations, giving him an unexpected 3 hours of freedom that he'd planned to spend reviewing quarterly projections in his study. He'd entered through the side entrance, as was his habit, avoiding the grand foyer, where Margaret might intercept him with social obligations. The house felt different in the early evening light, warmer somehow, filled with sounds he rarely heard above the din of his own productivity. From the kitchen drifted the rich scent of cornbread and the sound of Tommy's laughter. Real laughter, the kind Richard remembered from his own childhood, but rarely heard from his son. He paused, drawn by something he couldn't name, and found himself standing in the doorway, watching Maria teach Tommy to crack eggs. "Now, baby, you gotta be gentle with it," Maria was saying, her hands guiding Tommy's small fingers. "See, just like that. You got the magic touch." Tommy beamed up at her, his face glowing with pride and flour. "Mama Maria, can we make the kind with honey like last time?" "Course we can, sweet pea. Whatever makes you happy." The tenderness in her voice struck Richard like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd spoken to Tommy with that kind of love? When was the last time he'd spoken to Tommy at all? Beyond the perfunctory, "How was school?" that he barely waited to hear answered. Richard backed away from the kitchen, unsettled by what he'd witnessed. He told himself it was good that Tommy had someone to spend time with, that Maria was earning her substantial salary. But something nagged at him. The easy intimacy between them, the way Tommy's entire demeanor changed in her presence. Over the following weeks, Richard found himself paying attention to details that had previously escaped his notice. The way Tommy's drawings had evolved from angry scribbles to colorful scenes of families. The fact that his son had stopped having nightmares, no longer appearing at Richard's bedroom door in tears at 2 a.m. The sound of gospel music floating from the playroom on Sunday mornings, accompanied by Tommy's voice attempting to harmonize. If you asked him during those weeks whether he was a good father, Richard would have pointed to Tommy's private school tuition, his college fund, the trust that would ensure his financial security for life. He provided, therefore, he parented. It was the equation that had worked in business. Surely it applied to family as well. But equations Richard was learning don't account for variables like love. The revelation began with a drawing Tommy had left on Richard's desk, a crayon masterpiece featuring 3 figures standing in front of a house. A tall man in a blue suit, Richard recognized his daily uniform. A woman in a blue dress with kind eyes, and a small boy holding both their hands. "Daddy, that's our family," Tommy had explained matter-of-factly when Richard asked about it later. "That's you and Mama Maria and me." "Where's Mommy?" Richard had asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Tommy's face had scrunched in concentration. "Mommy's at her meeting. She's always at meetings. But Mama Maria is here. She makes me cookies and knows all the words to my favorite songs, and she doesn't look at her phone when I'm talking." Each word was a small indictment delivered with the devastating honesty only children possess. Richard had studied the drawing again, noting details he'd missed. The care with which Tommy had drawn Maria's smile, the way the small crayon figure stood closer to her than to him. How many of you have ever looked at your child's artwork and seen your own failures reflected back in bright Crayola colors? As the weeks passed, Richard began to understand the depth of the relationship that had formed in his absence. Maria wasn't just caring for Tommy, she was raising him. She attended his school plays when Richard was traveling and Margaret was busy. She kissed his scraped knees and listened to his dreams about becoming a superhero. She taught him that being different wasn't wrong, just special. Most importantly, she saw him. Really saw him not as an obligation or an heir to a fortune, but as a little boy who needed to feel loved and important and heard. Richard started working from home more often, telling himself he was keeping an eye on household operations. In reality, he was trying to understand what he'd been missing. He watched Maria's patience during Tommy's tantrums, her creativity in turning chores into games, her gentle correction of his mistakes without crushing his spirit. "Mama Maria," Tommy asked one afternoon as they folded laundry together, "why do you always smell like flowers?" "That's my lotion, baby. It's lavender. My mama used to wear it and her mama before that. It reminds me that love travels through generations even when we're far apart. Will you teach me to make that smell? So if you ever have to go away, I can remember you." Richard, listening from the hallway, felt his chest tighten. When had his son become so wise, so aware of loss? And when had this woman become so essential to their family that the mere thought of her leaving could bring that note of anxiety to Tommy's voice? The answer came to him with startling clarity. Maria Santos had become what Richard had never learned to be. Not just Tommy's caregiver, but his emotional anchor, his safe harbor, his home. If Richard Morrison was honest with himself, and success had taught him the value of brutal honesty, he would have to admit that he was jealous. Jealous of a housekeeper who had accomplished what all his money and status couldn't. She had won his son's heart completely, and deserved every bit of that love. The question that haunted him as he watched their easy intimacy was simple and devastating. What kind of father does that make me? The answer to Richard's unspoken question came on the evening that would change everything. He'd return home early again, this time to retrieve files for a morning presentation, when he heard the sound that stopped him cold, quiet sobbing coming from the library. Through the partially open door, he saw Maria sitting in his leather reading chair, Tommy's pajamas clutched in her hands as tears streamed down her face. She was speaking softly in what sounded like a prayer, her voice broken with grief. "Lord, please help me know what to do. That little boy, he don't understand why Mama has to go. How do I tell him I might never come back? How do I choose between saving my mama and breaking his heart?" Richard felt like an intruder witnessing such private pain, but he couldn't move. This woman who had brought such light into their home was crumbling, and he'd been too absorbed in his own world to notice. Before he could decide whether to retreat or intervene, small feet padded down the hallway. Tommy appeared in Spider-Man pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes as he searched for the person who had become his whole world. "Mama Maria, why are you crying?" Tommy's voice was small, confused. He'd never seen the strongest person in his life show such vulnerability. Maria quickly tried to compose herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Oh, baby, you should be in bed. Mama's just tired, that's all." But Tommy Morrison was 6 years old and possessed the supernatural ability all children have to see through adult deceptions. He climbed onto the chair beside her, his small arms wrapping around her waist. "Are you sad because Daddy doesn't play with us? I'm sad about that too sometimes." The innocent words hit Richard like a physical blow. His son thought Maria was crying because of his neglect, and in a way, Tommy wasn't wrong. If Richard had been present, really present, he might have seen the stress Maria was carrying, might have offered help, before desperation took hold. "No, sweet pea," Maria said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Daddy works very hard to take care of you. Mama Maria I got some news about my own mama back in Chicago. She's sick, and I might need to go help her." Tommy's grip on her tightened immediately. "But you can't go. Who's going to make my breakfast the way I like it? Who's going to sing the songs when I have scary dreams? Who's going to love me?" That last question broke something inside Maria's chest. "Oh, baby boy, your mama and daddy love you so much. No." Tommy's voice rose with the fierce emotion only children can muster. "Mommy's always busy, and Daddy's always working. You're the one who loves me. You're the one who's here. You're my real family." Richard stepped into the doorway, then unable to remain hidden, while his son poured out truths that cut deeper than any business failure ever could. Both Maria and Tommy startled at his appearance, Maria immediately trying to stand and return to the professional demeanor expected of her position. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, I was just—" "Daddy," Tommy interrupted, scrambling off the chair and running to Richard with desperate energy. "Daddy, you have to tell Mama Maria she can't leave. She can't go away." Richard knelt to Tommy's level, seeing his son clearly, perhaps for the first time. The fear in those blue eyes, the desperate love, the absolute certainty about who constituted his real family. It was all there, undeniable and heartbreaking. "Tommy, what's happening here?" Richard asked gently, though he already knew. "Mama Maria's real mama is sick, and she wants to go help her. But Daddy, if she goes away, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to know that I like my sandwich cut in triangles and that I'm scared of the wind sound at night? Mommy doesn't know those things, and you're always at work." Each word was like a small sword through Richard's chest. His son was laying out the truth of their family dynamic with devastating clarity. Maria was the parent who mattered, who knew him, who was present for the details that make up a childhood. "She loves me, Daddy," Tommy continued, tears now streaming down his cheeks. "And I love her. She's not just our helper. She's family. She's my family." Richard looked up at Maria, who was standing frozen between her duty as an employee and her love as a surrogate mother. In her eyes, he saw his own failure reflected back, the recognition that she had become what he should have been. "Maria," he said quietly, "tell me about your mother." What happened in the next 10 minutes would reshape the Morrison family forever, as a billionaire finally learned what his 6-year-old son had known all along. Money can't buy love, but love can transform everything. The transformation began that very night. After hearing about Evelyn Santos's condition, Richard made 2 phone calls. The first was to his financial manager, arranging an immediate wire transfer of $15,000, enough for the surgery and recovery care. The second was to the best kidney specialist in Chicago, ensuring Evelyn would receive the finest treatment available. But the real change went deeper than money. As Maria sobbed with relief and gratitude, Richard saw his son's face light up with a joy that no expensive toy had ever produced. "Daddy, you saved Mama Maria's mama." Tommy threw his arms around Richard's waist. "Now she doesn't have to go away." "Actually, son," Richard said, kneeling down, "I think Mama Maria should go to Chicago to be with her mother during the surgery, and I think we should go with her." 6 months later, the Morrison family looked completely different. Richard had opened a Chicago office and spent half his time there finally learning to balance business with being present. He could now make Tommy's favorite scrambled eggs, knew all the words to Amazing Grace, and attended every school event with Maria by his side. Maria no longer wore a uniform. As Tommy's official nanny and family coordinator, she had her own suite in both houses and a salary that reflected her true value to the family. More importantly, she had what she'd never expected to find in that mansion, a family that loved her completely. Margaret, initially resistant to the changes, eventually accepted that her son was thriving in ways her social calendar had never allowed. The family dynamic that emerged wasn't traditional, but it was real. Tommy Morrison, now 7, still calls her Mama Maria proudly. His latest drawing shows 4 people holding hands, Mommy, Daddy, Mama Maria, and him. At the bottom, in careful first-grade writing, he'd added "my big family." Sometimes the most life-changing words come from the smallest voices. Tommy Morrison didn't just save Maria Santos that night. He saved his entire family from a life without love, teaching them that family isn't defined by biology or bank accounts, but by who shows up, who stays, and who loves you completely. If Maria's love and Tommy's courage touched your heart, and you'd like to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Which moment in this story resonated most with you? Was it Tommy's fierce loyalty, Maria's selfless love, or Richard's transformation into a real father? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every family story matters, and yours might inspire someone who needs hope today.